let's bring the conversation back to you.
Me? You want to talk about me?
I want to talk about you because, because I've not met you before.
I've not met you before. Nothing about me.
Nothing before. You mentioned. I'd like to pick up on something you mentioned a minute ago about the meaning of a man's world.
Oh yeah.
What's the meaning? What's your purpose?
Oh my God! What's my purpose?
Let's not talk in a wider sense of like
story.
Let's not look too far ahead. Let's not go into legacy.
It's all good.
But what's your
legacy?
What's your purpose? What's your meaning? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
I wish to be in a position. How am I going to put this? Providing, which is very similar to service. I like to feel like I have the ability to help. And I think you could manifest that in all different kinds of ways. I think there's a lot of people who need to be listened to, of all different kinds, and I include men in that. You know, I think there's a real issue with talking to and listening to men, and giving them space to talk and break their silence. You know, we talk about that all the time at Survivors. We're Survivors. But also on a level of providing for those people immediately around me who sometimes need care and help, you know, sometimes need whatever it is, whether it's a safe space to come to, whether it's a chance to gather away from the internet. I am genuinely, and whilst there's absolutely some stuff that I'm working through at the moment, which we'll get into, particularly around addiction, and you know, because that's been a force in my life, as I know it has in yours. But I feel at the moment like I am living in this strange fantasy world where I never imagined I would be here where I am. I feel like the universe has given me gifts that I could never have anticipated in terms of stability. I never, if you'd have spoke to me 2 years ago, I was sad. I didn't know it. I was depressed. I wouldn't have told you that I was depressed because I didn't know I was depressed. I was nihilistic. I was smoking a lot of weed, playing a lot of computer games. I had lost my creativity. I had lost the idea of what my art had allowed me to do and my passion for that. And I was convinced at that point as well. I was not 2 years ago, actually. We're talking like, because time's gone so quickly. We're talking like 5 years ago. 5 years ago, yeah, pre-pandemic, and then through the pandemic. The dirty P word. Not that dirty P word. The pandemic. But yeah, I was in a very different headspace. And to fast forward now 5 years later, to be where I am, and I'm still sorting some shit out, but the universe gave me a present. The universe gave me a gift. And that's where I feel I am now. I feel like I'm in this strange place where I've got something to offer, and I'm figuring out now how best to offer that and how to put myself in those positions where I can.
That's so lovely.
And I don't really know what it is yet.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's a process.
Yeah,
I'm a journey.
Fixating a lot on gratitude because we live in a world where stability is a rare gift, and I feel when you're an artist, and you'll know this as an actor, right? Like right now, life's good. I don't know what life's going to be like in 2 years' time, right? So I have to make the most of what I have now in terms of building on it, working hard and continuing, because you don't really ever know as an artist, do you? Like, you know, the next 2 years could be an absolute disaster.
We can't think that far ahead.
You can't. You're not allowed to. But you're forced to. So, like, I'm constantly living in a place of future panic. Do you know what I mean? I am panicking 2 years into the future.
Me too.
I exist there. And that sometimes stops me from being able to enjoy the present that I'm in.
Well, so the antidote to that is gratitude.
Yeah, you have to pull yourself back, don't you?
That's the antidote.
Yeah, you have to pull yourself back.
Look at the life that I lead. Look at the voice that I have.
Yeah.
The importance of the work that I do. The fun that I get to have. The adventures I get to go on right now.
But you have to give too. And so this is, so you're talking about service. Like for me, I have to go, God, well, I've got this now. I have to make, because there are people in my life who really need a break. Do you know what I mean? And you have to try and serve that
you're no day at the beach.
You know what I mean? Oh, thanks. Really suffer. But you have to share the joys that you're given in this world. And for me, that's also part of securing yourself in the future. You know, because actually we are ultimately beings of community. This myth that the basic unit of humanity is the individual, like you can't live that as an artist.
No.
Because you end up like,
who are you creating for?
Right. Well, in 2 years' time, I also may need somebody.
Yeah.
And I might need to be that person who somebody else helps out with a bit of work, or somebody else helps out with this, there, and that.
I don't imagine that's going to happen.
Well, you never know. Like I said, fame these days, it's very niche.
Are you okay? Are you happy? It's a question that I often ask my guests, because I feel like men, we don't often ask that question of ourselves or of each other. How are you?
I don't. Do you know what I had? Do you know Ricky Beadle Blair?
Ricky Beadle Blair.
You should have Ricky Beadle Blair on.
Okay.
Ricky Beadle Blair is one of on the level he presents to you, is one of the most joyful people I've ever met.
I love those people.
Oh my God, he's a wonder. Like profound, interesting writer, producer, director, like actor, does like performs, like does a lot of like the Vogue ball stuff that you see in Liverpool.
I've been.
You will have seen.
I've
So
been
yeah,
to them.
like
I've judged
blonde
dreadlocks. I've judged the
yeah.
Vogue ball.
So Ricky's a wonder of a human being, and it's like one of those people who, when you spend time with them, they're like being in a beam of light. Like they're a joy. And I love Ricky. Like when people always ask me who should you follow online, I'm like Ricky Beadle Blair, without a doubt. But me and Ricky did a panel recently, and Ricky was talking to me about joy, and I really struggled to connect with joy, and Ricky couldn't understand that. Ricky could not get why I had difficulty. He was like, do you know when you're on, surely you know when you're on stage and you feel that room full of love and of people, and like in that moment I went, no. Sometimes I struggle to remember, and he's right in saying, like, I absolutely have experienced joy, right? I know that I have, but I struggle to remember it, and I struggle to image myself in joy sometimes, and that's a struggle I've had for a very, very long time. I think since I was a child, like I've really struggled with joy, and I struggle with any strong emotion. I struggle with anger. I struggle with sadness. Anything, I feel like whenever I start to get a strong emotion coming in, my tolerance for it is dreadful. And it gets to that certain point where I feel a little bit of emotion, and then all of a sudden,
you pull back.
It cuts out.
Wow.
Like cuts out. Which, do you know, and I had therapy for it for many, many years, which was about, I hope my therapist is watching, because he might disagree. But I had therapy for many years, which was about kind of playing with my tolerance of emotion. It was really useful, really good. But I kind of came to this conclusion in the end that, you know, there's probably always be a little bit like that. I'll always have a cutoff point. And it's about trying to push that tolerance up so I can experience and enjoy life. It's important. It's so important.
You've got to feel these things viscerally and deeply.
It's so important. But also I recognize that cutoff I have has absolutely been a self-defense mechanism. And at points in my life, it has been incredibly useful. Because I am cool as a cucumber in a crisis. You know, I am like sociopathic levels of strategy when a crisis hits.
This motherfucker's calm.
Right? It's like something happens. It's like doof, straight into it. Like, and there's no stopping me. Like when the adrenaline kicks in, I am there.
Ice cold.
Ice cold. No, well, not even ice cold. I understand the situation.
Stoic.
Is it stoicism? Perhaps. But I'm not without empathy either. So like, I'm really good with people. If people are having a bad time, I'm really good with it.
God, that's a complicated place to sit.
Yeah, but it's been, and it's not always been nice, and it's not always been easy, but it's been useful. Because it's allowed me to get where I am today.
Served you well.
Yeah, and I feel like there's always so when people ask me, are you happy? I can absolutely tell you objectively that yes, I am. I laugh a lot. I have a good time. I have a really I have a lovely partner. We're desperately in love with one another. We have a lovely flat, and like we live a beautiful life. That's where we get into bed at 9:30 every night. It's joyous.
That's a win. Oh God.
The joy of routine. I'm telling you, all you crazy party people, I've done it. Nothing compares to an early night and a nice early morning.
They'll get there.
Well, some of them don't. But I struggled with it till I was until I hit 40. But the
God, we're so similar.
It's telling
We're
you,
so similar.
Yeah. But I also acknowledge that I think I will always feel a level of tension, and I don't try and mask that. Because I am reconciled, like I'm all right. I'm good, and I don't want to lose that tension, because I think what it offers me is more than what it takes away now. And that feels like a nice place to be,
A clarity that it offers you.
In moments of panic.
Yeah.
But it also creates a great deal of confusion the rest of the time, but I think you need all kinds of different people in this world. I don't need to be somebody who's good at everything. And I talk to my friends about this, and I hope my friends know that when they're having a crisis, you can call me, and you know what? I'm pretty good in them. I'm not gonna panic. I'm not gonna try and steal your emotional moment. Like, I'm gonna go with it, and we're gonna sort it out.
I've spent an hour and a half in your company, and if any bad shit goes down,
come on,
I am ringing you immediately.
But it gives me pleasure, not to see somebody suffering.
Yeah, of course it does.
The afterwards of when you have a friend in crisis, and this can be linked to if we want to, let's be clear. There is not an objective ideal masculinity or an objective ideal femininity. Masculinity and femininity are things that we shape, right? And so when I say to you, let's build a new story for masculinity for people who need it. Let's build our stories together of masculinity. I'm not connecting with some deep, innate thing that is masculinity. I'm talking about how masculinity can be of use to us. Right. And I think there is something that's really beautiful. That's a nice thing to work into masculinity. I'm good in a crisis. Right. So I'm come to the macho stuff in a crisis. I can lift things as long as
let me get my toolbox.
Let me get my toolbox. I'm going to sort that shit out for you. And there are many women who are very good with tools as well. And that may be how they create ideals around femininity for themselves. The notion of the strong, powerful woman is a feminine notion. Beautiful. What were we saying? Yeah, so that idea of crisis, the feeling that you get when you have a friend in crisis and you've been able to help, that's a great feeling.
It's lovely, isn't it?
That feels powerful. It feels good. I feel like I've done good in the world, even if it's just for me mate. You know what I mean? You've just helped them deal with something in that day.
Giving advice is one of the loveliest places to exist, to occupy. Yeah. It really is.
Yeah, and sometimes not. Sometimes not giving advice, because sometimes advice can be what I think is right? Sometimes giving people space to make their own advice, or just listening. I think listening is this massively, I have to have talked relentlessly at you. But I think sometimes listening is incredibly powerful. I don't know whether you can hear it.
I'm not sure that's going to get picked up on these microphones.
It's all good. Yeah, we don't worry about it.
But there is an improv class next door, and they sound like they're
having way more fun than us.
Whoa!
We're having fun.
Don't just drop that.
No, we're having loads of fun. Don't take that as a personal attack. I'm not gaslighting you. They do sound like they're having a jolly old time.
They're having
though.
a lovely time. Whereabouts in Birmingham are you from?
I'm from the area known as the Black Country, which is just to the west side of Birmingham.
Yam yam.
I'm a yam. I am.
Hello, Bab.
Yeah, Dudley Wolverhampton.
Are
Walsall,
you from
all that.
Wolves?
Yeah, well, I'm not from Wolves. I'm from.
How am you?
My family's from Brandall.
Brandall, right?
Brandall. Yeah,
I'm from Stafford originally.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
Fabulous.
My mum's side of the family are all from West Brom.
Oh wow! So my dad was an Albion supporter.
Oh, then we'll up the baggies.
Yeah, my dad used to live when he grew up behind the Albion ground.
Wow! Oh, that literally West Brom.
Yeah, literally.
Wow! Do you get back there at all?
Not to West Brom.
No, to the Midlands.
Do you know they
still
moved?
got family?
So my family moved out to Kidderminster. So now I don't ever go back to Birmingham really, and I'm a big fan of Birmingham. I think it's a fab city with a lot to offer.
It has a lot. I think Birmingham's wasted potential. That's what I think when I think of Birmingham. I think it should be, and could be.
But there's something
an
about
epicenter.
Well, see, the thing about Birmingham is because I think there's something there about ego, right? Because Birmingham is an epicenter. It's unavoidable. So if you look at Birmingham's economy. Mm-hmm. If you look at its population, if you look at its actual size, Birmingham is an epicenter. In statistically, Birmingham is actually the largest city because the city of London is the city of Westminster, which is only a mile square. So Birmingham is technically the largest city in the UK. But Birmingham, in some ways, has never had to worry about projecting itself forward. It's never had to be the big I am. Now, Manchester, right? Manchester, which is obsessed about being the second biggest.
I like how your shoulders immediately went back when you went
Manchester. And I live in Manchester. I love Manchester. I am proud to be an adopted Mancunian. Like, I chose to live in Manchester, and there's a reason I chose to live in Manchester. It suits me. It suits me very well because I am egotistical sometimes. And
you really like the rain.
I really. Do you know that's a misconception?
No, it's not.
It is a misconception. The average rainfall
every time I've been there.
Yeah, but the thing is, the average rainfall in Manchester is below the national average.
That can't be true. That cannot be true. It's the dampest place.
It's damp.
Oh, okay. All right, fine.
It's damp. It is a moist city. And that's the groundwater. It is damp, but the actual rainfall, if you were measuring the actual rainfall, because it doesn't have a lot of variation in weather, Manchester. It's always
it's just
damp.
It's just a bit
damp. And that's actually why Manchester became so successful, was because they were working with cotton there. So they needed the water to not freeze.
Oh.
So because it's a microclimate, the water never freezes there. And you had 5 rivers that were all coming into it. There's not 5 rivers anymore, but there were 5 rivers. They then converted them into canals and things like that. So it's a damp city, it's a wet city. So absolutely it's damp. It's not a rainy city.
Oh, fair enough.
So I think it's very interesting. But what we're saying, yes, Manchester is very face. It's very projects itself forward, and at all levels of class, right? From the metal and glass skyscrapers to the gritty red bricks, it has that kind of we're the best. Manchester has everything except a beach, that famous line. Manchester is the best on the 7th day or whatever it is. God created Manchester, and that has served Manchester so well to a very, if you like, you could say it was a very macho masculine trait. The idea of front, face, all of that stuff, projecting yourself forward, making yourself big. And it served Manchester very well because Manchester has always punched above its weight in terms of its place in the world. If you ask anybody in the world where the second city is in the UK, they will say Manchester, even though statistically
it's Birmingham.
It's Birmingham. And I think that is something that should be celebrated about Manchester, the fact that it puffs itself up in the way that it does.
But that's also lent itself really well to Manchester because it has some of the best theatre in the country, some of the best music, some of the best bars and clubs, and the food in Manchester.
It's fab.
Fuck me,
it's
food
great
in Manchester.
It's a great place to live. Why would you want to live in London? I just don't understand. But the I think that living in London is the most peculiar form of self-harm.
It's the loneliest place you can live.
Oh, God,
It's so lonely. I was there for 18 months, and I think if you run like a high 6-figure salary living in London, I imagine the experience is okay. But for the rest of us mere mortals, I didn't leave Kilburn for 2 years.
Oh, God, you know what? I feel like if you had a 6-figure salary, there are far more interesting, stressful places to live.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I could think of 10 other more stressful, interesting places to live that you could live on that salary. Like, I've never been attracted to London.
No.
It just has never ever done it to me.
Manchester suits you.
Yeah, I love Manchester. Like, Manchester created me to a certain extent.
You
like,
feel that?
Yes. Oh my God. Like in some of the most profound, wonderful, and terrible ways, Manchester created me.
It's responsible for the best and worst of you.
Well, we are all products of our experiences, and some of the worst experiences that I have been in Manchester. Some of definitely the best experiences I've had in Manchester, but all of those experiences have made me who I am.
Wow.
Whether it's making me more resilient, whether it's taught me something about empathy for somebody who's really going through some shit. The bad stuff is just as part of me and has been as essential to creating me as the good stuff.
Wow.
And I wouldn't now have it any other way.
How long have you lived there?
Almost 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm old.
Oh, so Manchester, I'm old. Well, I said before the show, and I'll say it on air for anyone watching. Your skin is a joke.
Stop that.
It is a joke.
Stop that.
You don't have a fucking blemish on you.
Well, that's Botox, darling.
Yeah, but considering
a good work person, darling. It's
considering what you put your skin through on a regular basis.
Yeah,
it's quite something.
But do you know what? Coconut oil.
Is that what it is?
Coconut oil. To get rid of the makeup, I use coconut oil, so I'm not ever that harsh on my skin. And coconut oil is, of course, useful for so many things.
It's the best lubricant.
It's the best lubricant. Do you use coconut oil?
My mother might watch this.
I'm telling you, coconut oil, great for the body. It's great, just gets absorbed. It's wonderful.
It's very, very ecologically friendly as well.
Yeah.
So is Manchester responsible for Dr. Cheddar Gorgeous?
Totally.
Really?
Yeah. Cheddar was born in Manchester.
Born in Manchester?
Yeah, born in Manchester, totally. And born in a very particular moment where drag wasn't particularly... I mean, definitely you couldn't earn a lot of money from it. It was... drag was kind of looked down upon in that particular time. So I started doing drag probably around 2010. So it wasn't a way to earn a living unless you were going to be doing very traditional, like kind of cabaret pubs.
Yeah, that's
kind
what
of thing.
So
stuff's always been there.
I always think of. I mean, that's my opinion. My views on drag has changed a lot, obviously, because it's become a lot more popular and obviously Drag Race and all of that sort of side of it. But growing up, it was always the DJs and on the doors of clubs, and it was that cabaret.
Sorry, it's that kind of vibe.
It was that.
Yeah.
that literally
which is so important, right? I think people misunderstand drag hugely. And I think that when we start to think about what drag is and what its history is, often the way it's defined and the story that's told is a product of the fact that the only place that kind of divergence was allowed to exist was through theatre. And I think its regulation has played just as important part in how we think of drag as being cross-dressing and a type of theatre. When in fact, actually, when you look at what drag actually encompasses, it often doesn't have either of those elements in it. In fact, and in fact, a huge amount of it takes place not on stage. A huge amount of it exists in the kind of ephemeral moments when you're in a bar, you're in a club, you're chatting to somebody. The Doors, is a classic one.
Host.
The different kind of stage. It's the stage of the everyday life, right? So I think drag is very much an art form that is enacted in that the stuff of the relationship and connectivity between people. And I think that in many ways it has a kinship to the theatrics of religion and spirituality. more than it does to the theatrics of the stage.
That's interesting.
Because I think for me, drag's biggest power was its ability to create community, you know, so which is why when I started doing drag, we were running club nights, we were making groups of people happen in which stories were being told, like sermon, you know, where you were actually able to put experiences into these crystallized moments of storytelling on a stage at 3 a.m. in the morning. And so for those people who may feel kicked out of other forms of communitas, they were able to come together in those moments. And drag plays a particular role in that. And sure, so I have this conversation with drag queens all the time, because some drag queens are like, nah, for me, it's just a role. It's a role like any other. You know, they may have trained as an actor or done this. It's a role like any other. And I always say to them, yeah, even if that is true for you, and a lot of the time it isn't, because when you get into it, they're like, well, yeah, of course I have a drink with people afterwards.
I'd find that really easy to pick apart, and I'm not part of that world.
Yeah. So even though for them it may not even work like that, maybe they'll have a drink afterwards, or maybe the big thing is, of course, that the role moves beyond each performance, but beyond each staging. The role continues to live. Unlike if you go and play Macbeth, right? People, and you're a famous actor who plays Macbeth. Mm-hmm. You don't continue being Macbeth when you come off stage, right? Even if you're heavily associated with playing Macbeth, you don't continue to be Macbeth. Macbeth does not stand in front of you for the rest of your life. Whereas with drag is a little different normally. You know, drag, for most people who do drag, whether it's kinging, queening, or something in between, the drag lives on. It keeps going. It becomes a projection of yourself that goes between these performances. But more importantly, for the audience, it's never the same as Macbeth, because the audience, they may form a relationship with the actor. And I don't mean a direct relationship. I mean a sense of relatedness. And this is made real in all kinds of ways nowadays with social media. I follow so-and-so online. I see their exes, or whatever they're called now, blue skies. You know, I have that idea of connection to them. They don't make that connection with Macbeth. They make it with the actor. When you're a drag queen, people aren't connecting with me as Dr. Michael John Atkins. You know, they're connecting with Cheddar Gorgeous. Cheddar Gorgeous is a social entity in their lives. They have built a sense of relatedness to it. It is quite unlike acting. It's quite unlike a theatrical role, even if when the performer themselves sees it that way. And I just think that's interesting, that we often think of drag rather than as a means of kind of connected storytelling and manifesting of our internal senses of identity, experiences, fantasies, realms of reality. We see it as a form of theatre. And that's to do with a wider diminishing of what we consider theatre to be, and what we consider theatre to be as a form of entertainment, distraction and diversion, right? Fakeness, right? Because it is safe to put all that stuff there. Because if we give it, and I say this about drag, and I also think this about theatre, any form of artistic storytelling, if we give it the weight that it deserves, then it becomes a threat. It becomes something that challenges the status quo of politics and economies.
The best theatre does challenge.
It does.
The best drag challenge.
It does. It's not allowed to be funded as such.
don't let them know.
Right. Don't let them know.
Well, I think they already do know. I don't think we've had a government in a very long time that values art or drag. I don't think we've had anyone in power.
Well, drag more becomes a threat, because it's ironically, even though, and this is the kind of funny thing that you see with people who dislike drag for the many reasons that you might dislike drag. I mean, there are some things I hate about it, but you see this peculiar contradiction, which is, it's silly, it doesn't matter, it's just men prancing around in whatever, or women prancing around dressed up as men. It's just daftness, it's silly. And it's profoundly dangerous. And that's when you really understand, right, that contradiction. You understand that they're trying to belittle you and tell you you're dangerous. And that's why you understand that all of those kind of queer art forms and forms of queer expression, you can see the same as it filters through into people's everyday lives, particularly for people who are trans and people who, and I'm not at all equating the two because they're not the same. But for anything that diverges from that which we might deem as normal, which is a stupid concept, for anything that diverges, we have to identify it as a potential threat.
It's what people are terrified.
Terrified, even if it has very little impact. Like I am quite happy occupying my little queer space on like social media or in clubs or doing my shows or whatever.
Don't read any stories to children. Do you understand?
Absolutely. Do you know what I mean?
If you read,
oh my God,
a story to my niece,
yeah, crazy.
God forbid.
Do you want to know? Do you want to know? And like, so we both, as you say, we both work as ambassadors for a charity called We're Survivors, which works with male survivors of childhood sexual abuse and rape. And, you know, one of the things that I have learned in my time as an ambassador, and I worked in several other roles within the organisation over the years as well, is that generally paedophiles and people who wish to do harm to children, one of the things they really don't do is try and attract attention to themselves. They find the places in which they can have access to children and arouse the least amount of suspicion, right? I guarantee you that putting on a wig and heels and making yourself the most visible and have everybody, because, you know, immediately you put yourself in the firing line as somebody who is a gender deviant, right? That would not be a good strategy for somebody who's trying to have a discreet access to a child. Most abuse occurs within a family situation, and then when it's not, it's coaches,
it's positions of power.
It is those places. It is where you can have unrestricted access to a child, and where people are not going to place suspicion on you, where you're seen as a trusted figure. And my argument when I see, and you know, I have been to drag festivals. I did one in Ireland a few years ago, and there were people outside, not a massive amount of people, but there were a group of protesters outside chanting paedophile.
Where was this?
This was in Dublin. So
I'm so sorry.
It's all right, you know. Thank you, but it's all right.
That's
and like,
fine, that's
isn't that you kind of go? Isn't that fucked? What's fucked is that happened, but also it's fucked that it's become normalized to me. It's become something that I'm conscious of and that I have to defend myself against. And what I always say whenever, and if I get the chance to talk to those people,
that was going to be my next question.
You know, you do sometimes. I didn't on that occasion because they were placed apart from us. The police were creating a division. But if you do get that chance to talk to people, I always say you don't understand how what you're doing is putting children at risk. And the reason why I say that to them, to protesters, you don't understand you're doing the opposite than you think you're doing. Because if you create a tension here, you are ignoring the potential ways and the potential places where this is actually happening.
You're looking in the wrong place,
You're
guys.
looking in the wrong place, and you're encouraging everybody else to look in the wrong place. And, you know, it means that child who might be the subject of abuse from a parent or guardian or teacher, are you seriously telling me that you're worried about the drag queen? Who is seeing them in the library, supervised by adults constantly? Are you serious?
I've never seen, heard, or read one report of a drag artist.
But the issue is there'll be one drag queen paedophile out there. They'll be hailed as
Has
this
to
example.
spoil it for the rest of us.
We told you that they're all doing it, and that's the way this kind of media works, though, right? And that's the way that mentality works. You look for the one example which you use as evidence for the way this is the way that it is, rather than actually examining the massive evidence to the contrary.
Well, yeah, it's sexualizing the art form. You're bringing sex into it.
I can understand why people make that confusion, because a huge part of what you see in drag could be interpreted as sexualized. You know, we talk very frankly about sex in stage shows and things like that. But you see this, and this is the thing. Yes, so this is what gets me. You have an actor that does an adult film. I don't mean a porn film. I mean an 18+ film, right? And then they do a Disney film. You don't accuse that actor of being a subversive element in a child's life, you recognize that sometimes an art form can lend itself to entertaining children. Sometimes an art form can lend itself to entertaining adults. Sometimes an art form can lend itself to a political protest, right? Art doesn't come laden, as forms, doesn't come laden with these moral burdens. Art is a communicative form that can be put to all kinds of uses and for all kinds of purposes. Some of them what you find good, some of them what you find bad. But there's that addition. I think ultimately what it comes down to is homophobia. And this is what people, but this is ultimately what people I think really don't want you to call out on. And so there was Texas many years ago in the city of Austin. I was part of a drag festival in Austin it was pre-Trump, I think. And
Austin's quite forward-thinking.
Austin's a fab place. Love Austin. Beautiful place. It's known as the Blue Bubble. So
the rest of Texas fucking hate Austin.
Yeah, awful. So they think it, but because it's the weird little liberal Democrat city.
It's full of people like you.
Yeah, well, not quite like.
But you know what I mean.
But so I did an event there, and to be fair, the drag scene was very different in the UK as to what it was becoming. It was very different in the States back then as well. But I did this convention, and at the time I was doing a lot of burlesque work, and I would do this. I used to do this kind of burlesque unicorn look, and I was like pretty unclothed. I had what's called a C cup, which is this kind of like modesty covering. I had this built C cup.
I've worn it.
We all love a C cup. That's good. But so this C cup, it was built up into a large piece of costume. It was glued to my body, right? And so I would do this with kind of like heels and makeup and like obviously a modesty covering. You know, there was no indecent exposure. I was certainly not more exposed than a person in swimwear. And I remember I did a meet and greet in this kind of convention hall with this kind of look that was a burlesque look. And back then, you didn't have the same popularization of drag. You didn't have as many drag queen readings or things like that. It wasn't at all an art form that was generally considered applicable to children's entertainment. That's a growing economy that's come from demand from parents. Like, let's bear this in mind. This is not drag queens desperately wanting to work for children. Drag queens have no desire generally to work with children. Why would you want to work with children? It doesn't make any sense at all. But there's a market for it. And like all artists, they get involved in the market of entertainment that's available to them. But anyway, there was maybe like a couple, even that, probably like 2 or 3 children at the event, like in total. Were there with parents, fully supervised, and dressing up, like playing, being silly, like kids do. They dress up, put silly glitter on and all of that sort of stuff. And I remember this child ran over to me. They weren't part of the meet and greet I was part of, but this child ran over to me because I was dressed as a unicorn, right? Let's be clear. Mummy, look at the unicorn. They ran over to me. Their parent took a photograph. And by and by, whatever. I think if I'd have known, I probably wouldn't have worn that outfit. Certainly, if I'd have known what was to follow, I would have self-censored. But what followed was that photograph became used by InfoWars. Do you remember InfoWars?
That weird guy.
That weird guy who was the one who came up with all of the pizza shop paedophile conspiracies.
So glad he disappeared from the face of the earth.
He's back. No, he's back.
Oh, is he back?
It's Steve Bannon. He's back, isn't he?
Oh, good. I'm glad Steve's
Don't worry,
back
he's
with
back.
With his awful complexion and
the
his
oligarchy's in. It's
terrible
cool.
views.
And so that image was used on a YouTube video, and it was used to. The name of the video was "Paedophile Ring Exposed" at drag convention. No evidence, zero evidence.
But it doesn't matter.
Explosive.
Your image under the name, under the word paedophile.
And it taught me a lot because it taught me about how some things are beyond self-expression. Some things are about self-protection for queer people. And I learned that, and I learned about self-censor. And I reflected, what was funny is I felt really bad for a little while. I felt really bad. I was like, oh my God, I've done something terrible. I've done something terrible. And then I thought, if that child had a picture taken with a woman in a swimsuit, this is a hotel. Let's bear in mind, there's a swimming pool just outside that window. If that child had run up and had a photo taken with a woman in a swimsuit, a Miss Beauty pageant contestant,
a bikini,
a bodybuilding competitor, if that child would have had a photograph, would that person been accused of being a paedophile? No. The issue has nothing to do with my level of nudity. The issue is that I'm gay.
Homophobia.
It's homophobia. It's classic homophobia. And that is the thing. It's just masked homophobia. I think the worry is now we're entering a world where people are just going to unmask the homophobia. They're going to be like, yeah, it's because you're gay, because all gays are paedophiles, which is a classic story that has been used against queer people. We can see you're a little bit of, you're not like us. You're not like us. You must be a demon. And that is the distraction. Because if they're focusing on me, if the priest, and I'm not saying that all priests are pedophiles because they're not, but in terms of, if you were that morally righteous person who is calling somebody else something, what a better way to hide. Do you know? And so we are looking in the wrong place. There's a really problematic piece of research by a guy called Loud Humphreys, which was about cruising. But there was a really interesting concept in it where he talked about the breastplate of righteousness. And he was talking at the time about gay men who, and you can't ignore it because I'm not saying that it's shameful or wrong to be gay. But at the time, they were living in a context where it was shameful and wrong to be gay. And he described how a lot of there were the queers who were not out, but not living regular normal lives, normal quote unquote lives, normal heterosexual lives, the queers. And then there were also men. It was called Tea Room Trade. This book is. So it was about public toilets and men having sex in public toilets. And there were men who would visit these places who were straight, quote unquote, married. And he talked about how he is an incredibly unethical researcher. But his work was fascinating, but incredibly unethical. So he followed people from these toilets. He followed them, and he then, it's really unethical. Any researchers out there, don't get any ideas. Like, honestly. But he followed them from the tea rooms. He took down their car registration plates, and then he inserted their names into census data that he was then responsible for collecting in another job he had. So he then got to interview them as part of census, right? So he then had this amazing field of data with men who would never have granted him an interview, right? So highly unethical, problematic research. But he talked, oh God, the 60s, it was wild. Oh my God, that was not even half of it, I think, in the 60s. But the research he did, he talked about this idea of a breastplate of righteousness. And when people are doing things that they find reprehensible and shameful, they conceal that often through an image of righteousness. And I think it's such an important concept to think about, of how, and if we look at Jimmy Savile, Lord Jimmy or whatever he was, Sir Jimmy. You know, he created this image of himself, which was the man who did good for children. He launched charities. He made it look like he was the most giving and wonderful human being.
Paid for a hospital.
With a morgue.
For sick children.
Yes. You know, that is what you're ignoring. That is where you're diverting the attention away from by looking at these artists who are just getting a gig, you know? They're reading a story to children, going and smiling, dressing up as a princess and reading kids' stories about princesses and princes and penguins. Like, it's nonsense.
Do you think has it changed? Do you feel like things have changed in any way in this country? So on the back of Drag Race and Drag SOS and all those sort of shows.
I think change is a very hard thing to measure these days because.
Do you feel it though? Do you feel it because you obviously because you're quite
very rarely experience direct hate except for online. In my everyday life.
But vice versa, have you experienced more positivity in public?
Sure. I very rarely get a negative reaction. I get only people who are like, "Oh, I love your makeup. Oh, fabulous. Oh, that's wonderful." But then I live in the middle of a city centre. I live in Manchester, so I live in a very cosmopolitan bubble. I'm aware that outside of that, for people who are just walking down the street trying to live their lives looking a little bit different, that's a different kettle of fish. I think most of the trans people I know, they're scared to leave the house.
Yeah,
it's funny. I can get celebrated for wearing a dress on the street. Yeah, a lot of like my trans female friends, like they are having a tough time. Trans women friends, they're having a tough time at the moment.
What are people so afraid of? Like, why are people so? Why are people so scared?
I think because
trans women?
We're told this thing from birth that gender is so imperatively innate and important to us, and we don't really learn about. And I'm not talking about sex here. Like, there's this big debate at the moment about sex and gender and the kind of distinction between them, which is an old distinction, right? So there's this weird desire to discard the notion of gender. Ironically, I think sometimes from both sides, right? So there's this weird reticence about acknowledging biological sex. I mean, most of the trans people in my life have a problem with acknowledging that, but they understand how it can contribute to the sexism that they face, or the transphobia.
Part of their identity.
Right. They understand. They get it. But like, what was the question again? Sorry. Why are people so afraid? So there's this weird. I think that people really struggle because it leads to existential crisis. People struggle to understand how something that feels so incredibly innate to them could possibly be different for another person, right? And they worry that if they acknowledge that this thing that they find innate to them is different for somebody else, I think it troubles the innate nature that they have assumed.
Oh, so they worry that it changes something about
for them
as
because
well.
they see. I feel like because people build their identities and their desires and the sense of who they are on these building blocks, and some people never ever question where those building blocks came from. They just assume we were hardwired into it, be it through religion or be it through biology or whatever you're building your sense of self on. And they find it hard to conceive that somebody else could see that differently. And in recognizing in the other, and this is classic with existential crisis, when you recognize difference in the other, you have to confront what you think of as innate. Anthropologists do this all the time. So for me, it's like, I didn't have a choice. And so I get why it's troubling to people. I think the real thing that we need to start looking at, though, is that there are 0.3% trans people in this country, same in the US. We are debating and giving airtime to an issue that ultimately affects 0.3% of people. We are allowing that to create an existential crisis in the entire population. In the past, before we were all constantly rubbing up against one another on social media, like we were building towards something in terms of care for trans people and making sure they received the medical care that they needed and the access to the things that they needed to try and live a good and normal and healthy and wonderful life, to be able to thrive. We were heading there. And now all of a sudden, social media, because it wants to put these kind of opposing views next to each other constantly, it's this weird contradiction of visibility sometimes. I feel like certainly for the trans people in my life, sure, there's been some strides that have come from visibility. There's been a lot of shit that they now have to face because everyone's debating whether they're allowed to exist, whether they're allowed in toilets. Like, this was not a debate. And we are talking about something that affects such a tiny proportion of people, costs so very little in the grand scheme of things, And yet for those people is so imperatively important. And as a result, what you're not talking about is the fact that billionaires are coming for your grandma's house. And I mean
Yeah,
that.
it's true. It's true.
Like,
well, when you've got people like J.K. Rowling, who's got millions of followers and such a huge platform and such a huge voice, who could be doing so much good work, obsessing that trans women are taking women's rights away from them and pitting trans women against women.
Yeah, but the notion of gender is central to feminism. So,
Right.
Simone de Beauvoir, a woman is not born, a woman is made, right? So this notion that the ideas of what we think of to be a woman are shaped by the world in which we live. And often what we think of to be a woman is shaped by the oppression of women. And so we have to unravel that and allow new forms of what it means to be a woman to proliferate. We need a language that describes the distinction, if you like, between the body that you are born into and the person that you want to become. So transness is imperatively linked to feminist liberation and to the liberation of women. And the real risk, and this is and what we are now seeing in the United States of America, the real risk of when you start to unravel that which feminism has been brought on, you start to reduce the idea of what it is to be a woman to biological essentialism. So we now think of being a woman as reproductive capacity. Are we for real? Have they not seen The Handmaid's Tale? Yeah. Have you not seen it? Like, we are now entering that world again. And so we will see, I guarantee you, they're starting, like, there was something I saw the other day about, and we're like talking for hours and we're going massively off topic, but I saw a video the other day about the first gender clinic, and it was in Germany. And it was when they first started doing, because they started doing sex reassignment operations. It was a war surgeon who was in penis reconstructions for soldiers. That's where it kind of started, right? And there's a really big, interesting discussion you can have around gender conformity and transness and the idea of changing your body to conform to an idea of a particular gender. There's a massive conversation to have there. That's, I think, really interesting, really important. But what's fascinating is that clinic had it was one of the first places that was shut down by the Nazis. So you're like, they came for the trans people too back then.
Funny that.
This is how
I'm really
it
glad
starts.
I'm really glad that things have moved on so much since the 1930s.
This is how it starts, and it is a warning. Like, I'm not warning you. Like, I am not warning women. Like, there's a history should warn you. Like, they will come for this, and then they're coming for your body too, because women, they don't do well in fascist regimes. Like, it is. And like Handmaid's Tale is a fictional fascist regime, although better than the one that we have, because at least they cared about the environment. Have you seen Handmaid's Tale? Yeah. But we will see this, and it's happening now. Abortion is being rolled back in the States.
Yeah. The autonomy of women's bodies,
and we're reducing the idea of what it is to be a woman to their reproductive capacity again. And that will happen very subtly. And it's a weird one. Sorry, we've talked for a long time now.
It's a problematic.
Are you done?
It's a problematic one, and it's one that I wish there was an easier solution.
Yeah.
But I think, the more conversations that we have and the more that we put these ideas and these thoughts out there.
Is that how you end every podcast discussion?
And with what?
The more conversations we have.
Oh, yeah. The more podcast episodes that we put out.
Right. Get out there and march.
Turn this shitty podcast off. Get out there and make a difference.
But like, in terms of, because it's hard to find direct action these days.
No.
I think podcasts are profoundly powerful. Just
Hugely.
for the fact they force us to listen to something for a long period of time, hopefully. Long form is definitely the way to go. But it is difficult then to transfer that, rather than you switching over to your stories and looking at Instagram for the next 2 hours. How do you start to How do you start to think with nuance and petition for actual change to happen? And I say that without an answer because it's something I've noticed for the last 20 years. Like, to a certain extent, the power of our protest has diminished. And now our desire to protest is diminished because we saw it with the Second Iraq War. You know, they didn't care. Millions of people called Tony Blair a war criminal at that point. It didn't make any difference.
What happened?
It carried on. There is a whole, but it links to this other thing. And I suppose this is where you probably can make a little bit of a difference. For all the stuff we've discussed, and it winds into Male Mind Matters, because we talked so much about men's mental health and how actually this kind of weird conflict, hostile, aggression-driven image of masculinity serves a particular purpose within a larger political structure. And so if you really are thinking of how you can take the things that this may have made you think about and do something with it, stop using Amazon. Do you know, stop engaging with social media unless you're engaging strategically with these systems that are encouraging it. Fuck the algorithm up. Like, the other day I put out like a really random bitty image of a blue square, like for no reason, because there's this weird thing now that I feel like I want to lash out on social media and with the algorithm. I don't want to lash out at people. I want to disrupt this thing somehow. And I think one of the best ways you can do sometimes is disengaging. We have to try and seek pathways to our own freeing, our own nourishment, the health of our own brains. And in doing so, hopefully unravel that shit that is creating shit for us.
Amen. Can we do this again?
Yeah, love it.
Because I could do a whole series with you.
Yeah, have chats.
This has been a fucking honour and a pleasure. And
it's always a joy.
A joy. Thank you for coming on, mate.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's nice to be here. It's nice to be here talking to the men. You know, a lot of the time they ignore me. But you know what? I think this is something that would probably be for another day. But there's something I think. So the two guys who I chatted to on the train today, you might actually be able to insert this in earlier. Two guys I chatted to on the train today. We would never met if it hadn't been from a train. And they were nice guys. They were fun guys. I don't know how far our friendships would be able to go, but they were nice. They were friendly. We had an interesting discussion. And he went to me, "You gay?" And I went, "Obviously." And they both laughed, right? There's this weird, and I have it. I could look at guys like that and think they're going to want to do me harm, right? Straight men aren't going to want to listen to me or talk to me or be able to get anything out of the conversation. It's bullshit. It's absolute bullshit. The majority of straight men have no problem with my sexuality, but we have this amplified image online of a certain kind of masculinity that some of those guys may be buying into. Don't get me wrong. That they're buying into, they can F slurs and, gay boys and bum boys and all that stuff. But actually face to face, when they're faced with another man or another human or whatever you might want to put it, they don't have a problem at all.
No, once you've engaged with them.
Once you've engaged, and actually I hope they've left that situation. I don't know what kind of views they have, but I hope that they've left that situation thinking that guy was all right. There's an entire other area to get into another day, which is about non-binariness, because I am known as non-binary.
Let's do that
another time.
Another time. Thank you.
Pleasure.
From the bottom of my heart.
Sorry I spent so long chatting to you.
That's literally the purpose of this show. Thank you.
Fab.